can help you save some money rather than just make it all about talking about incentives. And so the point is probably less about the in-kind incentives themselves and more about sitting down and putting together a community-specific plan with these companies. And I can assure you from my experience, most of these companies haven't been down this path before. And so a few have, and a few maybe have worked on site selection projects, but many of them are looking for the community to provide a structure or looking for the community to come back and provide answers. They don't have them all. They're looking for advice and feedback. And I always say what starts out as a proposed project and what actually gets completed, I don't want to say looks night and day different, but oftentimes there are significant changes. And lastly is private equity, and I've dedicated a specific slide to this because this is a question I get a lot. I mentioned at the start of the presentation that I maintain my securities licenses, which does not make me the expert in the private equity world. What it does do is keep me current on SEC and FINRA oversight and associated regulation. And if I can be blunt, I'm seeing more and more communities wanting to embrace private equity, not as the, and if I say private equity, you can interchange that with angel investing. Some people call it venture capital. Semantics aside, I'm seeing more communities embrace this this model, if you will, as a tool. It's not the end-all, be-all. It's not that if a community has an investment fund or local investors that problem solve, but I think it is an effective tool. And if I can be blunt, what I think is holding some communities back that are interested in this is we fear what we don't know. And I don't think it is appropriate to think that an economic development director should be well versed in private equity financing. That being said, I'm seeing more and more communities take advantage of it for two reasons. One, it's a great marketing tool and recruitment tool in general. So I see a lot of communities that will talk to companies and say, hey, we can't guarantee, we don't speak for our investment fund or investors locally, but boy, we have some folks that like to take a look at projects, and boy, if we start a conversation and we see a fit and you come down for a visit, we can probably entertain that as part of the conversation and visit. And that piques the interest of a lot, especially at some smaller companies. The other thing I'm finding is that it's received very well locally. And so three vehicles that I see, and I've written a little white paper on this. It's about 15 pages. If anybody's interested, I'm more than happy to share it. It's probably not, again, I'm not the foremost expert, but I try to write it from the vantage point of an economic development director, so I've gotten some good feedback on it if anybody wants to see it. But essentially, there's three vehicles that I'm seeing. One is the formal investment fund, where a community will get together. It could be as few as 5, as many as 25 investors. Sometimes there's a lead agency, if you will, whether it's a regional economic development group, a utility, et cetera, who might lead the effort, but they'll commit capital. Could be a few $100,000 up to a couple $1 million, and now there's dedicated capital set aside with predetermined objectives in terms of timeline to have the capital invested, industry and types of projects the fund's going to look at, et cetera. Having a fund can be a great marketing tool. It is not requisite for a community to have one in order to utilize private equity as a tool. Second is a formal angel investor network where a group, again, could be as few as 5, as many as 25, may meet monthly, more realistically quarterly, and each individual investor speaks for his or her own checkbook, but they band together, leverage each other's experience and skill sets to review deals, etc. And then other times, and I see this with some small communities that say, Justin, either we've been down this path, or you know what, I just don't want to take on this initiative right now. I don't think there's buy-in. But on a case-by-case basis, and I'll give an example here in a few minutes, I've had a community, several communities rather, who have said, hey, we've got a company, we want to recruit them, and either as part of the recruitment process or frankly, because we're so excited about the project, we'd like to put the opportunity in front of some investors locally, we'll pull together an ad hoc group. I'm always happy to help, whether I end up working formally with anybody on the phone or not. This is something I believe in. I believe that beyond job creation, that wealth creation, meaning having local ownership of successful companies in a community, is long-term very beneficial to a community. I'm a big believer in it, so if anybody ever has questions, I'm happy to share my advice and experience with it. But I do see a lot more communities employing this. The biggest reason I don't see communities doing it is lack of understanding of how to do it. And two, and I'm from a small town, so I appreciate this, I have had communities come back to me and say, Justin, here's the reality. I don't want to pick up the phone and call it, let's call it what it is and be blunt, the 10 wealthy folks in town and say, good news, we'd like a company to come to town and we'd like for you to invest in them to make that happen. And I would agree, that would be a terribly uncomfortable, if not inappropriate phone call to make. What I have found is there are some easy things to do, however, to get the word out privately and appropriately through securities law to let prospective investors know if there isn't a formal fund or angel network that there is an opportunity either to meet directly with the company or that, hey, we're thinking about putting a fund together locally and we'd like to come and get your feedback and see if you have an interest. What I can tell you is for every single situation where a community has said, I'm hesitant, but I'm willing to see it through because I want to see if there's an appetite. Even investors that aren't interested in a fund, aren't interested in being part of a group, aren't interested in a specific project, in almost all cases, if it's done right, they come back and say, it's good to know that the community is bringing these types of companies in, that there are these type of local opportunities for investment. Keep me posted in the future. And so I've always seen it done appropriately be met very much with open arms locally. So touch on a few different things. Question that I then get from people is, okay, we're interested, and whether through your program, Justin, or in general we have our own initiatives, where do we find these folks? We know intuitively we can go to trade shows and find big companies. We court site selectors, we go to site selection conferences, etc. But where do we find these small to mid-sized businesses? And I can tell you most of them aren't talking to site selectors. Most of them aren't going to large trade shows. What they are doing is, especially in the larger metro areas, whether that's a Des Moines or a Milwaukee or Omaha or whatnot, a lot of these companies, small to mid-sized, go to their what I call trusted advisors repeatedly for advice, whether that's bankers, accountants, attorneys, etc. And in turn, a lot of these small to mid-sized accounting, legal firms, etc., will put together different forums on, maybe it's IP related, maybe it is on succession planning, those types of things. I find that those are very target-rich environments, both for communities to talk directly to companies, but also to get their message out. In the same way that they would go to a trade show and have a booth for a couple of days, they may sponsor one of these types of programs. They may go and develop a rapport with different advisory firms, again, the accountants, bankers, etc. So I see a lot of communities putting emphasis there and taking it away from going to the bigger trade shows and working with site selectors, etc. I see communities either put their own initiatives together in terms of local events in their community, less under the auspices of good news, we're going to get 20 companies to come and look at our community and hopefully locate here, and more that they're pulling in folks from, say, a surrounding metro area or companies from a certain industry, bringing them down for a day or two and putting on a conference and showcasing their community. What I see time and again is that most small to mid-sized businesses either don't know what the opportunities are, so they're completely unaware of what the opportunities are to go work with rural communities, or they have no idea where to begin. And so I'm seeing more communities get themselves out in front of those types of companies. What doesn't work is communities taking and advertising what I call the big company incentives. So I had a community recently that I know, and I ran into them at a conference, and it was an appropriate conference, I think, for them to be at. And they were very excited. They were working the room, talking to a lot of people, small to mid-sized businesses, probably 10 to maybe 50 employees, and they were enthusiastic, and everything they handed out literature-wise was specific to their shovel-ready industrial park. Well, these were more technology-based companies that, but for save a few, we're not going to be building facilities anytime soon. And so they're enthusiastic, they're there, but they were, in my opinion, leading with the wrong message. Doesn't mean you have to go spend thousands of dollars on a whole bunch of new literature, but it's a little bit of that know thy audience. And in this case, it's important to talk about whether it's joint venture opportunities with local industry, whether it is joint or co-working office space, if there are equity options, if there are loan programs. Not that you have to throw money at the problem, but dangle the carrot, if you will, in front of the companies in terms of what they want. And most of them aren't interested in what a lot of the traditional literature that I see advertises, such as the tax programs, the industrial parks, etc. So I wish there were a magic bullet in terms of where to go find these companies. I suppose, however, if there were, I wouldn't have a job, and many of the folks on the phone wouldn't either. This is tough work. At the same time, I can assure you there's a wealth of opportunity because there are a significant amount of companies out there that aren't talking to any other communities. They aren't talking to site selectors. They're, in my opinion, maybe I'm the opportunist, they're waiting for folks like us to approach them. So I've touched on a few things. Just very briefly, my background, what we do with our CVN program, our definition very widely of growth-oriented businesses, why I think communities are interested more so than ever in pursuing these types of companies, what some of the non-traditional incentives are, where these companies are, and just as important, where they aren't and how not to approach them. And then I'm going to run through just briefly a couple of case studies that hopefully will generate some questions. So the first company, V. Blumen, very simply put, is in the what I'll call telemedicine business. And so think of, say, somebody elderly or that needs daily check-in at their house, apartment, etc. Could have a computer screen where somebody could interface with them electronically. When I met the company a couple of years ago, they said, well, I don't know, we're working with some rural communities, but I don't think we could do anything. They came back and said, we've done a little bit of research, Justin, and boy, these rural areas have pretty significant, not all of them, but some pretty significant broadband capabilities we'd like to explore. Maybe we should put some of our staff there, because we have to invest a lot in training people, and we're not going to have a significant amount of staff members, but we wouldn't want to have a whole bunch of folks turn over that we're investing in training them. So long story short, they went to a community in northern Minnesota that we work with, and the driver for the community is they said, we did this large broadband initiative. We have no illusions that we're going to recruit Google in next year, but we would like to start to develop a presence and have companies, whether they're technology, software, or just in general companies that can take advantage of our broadband. We need to learn a few things ourselves, however, and so we want to walk before we run. And so the company to date, I have 2 employees listed. I think they hired their 4th recently. And so it's a small project, but the community was ecstatic because they were able to learn some things and get that first company in. They said, now we have a story to tell. Now we have some leverage. Now we feel like we can go out and we learn some things and talk to other companies. For the company, they said, this is great. We have people that want to work for us that we think will be loyal, and we'll pay them fairly. And in return, we've got all the broadband we can handle, which is not going to be the case in the areas that we looked in Minneapolis. Cap Arms is a company that who was founded by 3 Iraq veterans, and Iraq War veterans, and they were manufacturing over in Mendota Heights, which is a suburb of Minneapolis by the airport, and they make specialty ammunition, rifles, and distribute gunpowder. And when I met them, they said, Justin, we just aren't getting a real warm reception based on the industry that we're in from folks in the metro. And so I get to ask the question a lot, well, who's your competition? Well, I don't view it that I really have any. And I think from an individual community level, with a lot of small to mid-sized companies, the competition oftentimes is not other communities, site selectors, economic development groups. The competition is the alternative. And what I mean by that in this case is these guys had engaged a commercial real estate agent, and they said, we're going to move across the river into Wisconsin. And I said, is it going to be better? And they said, well, it won't be any worse. And I said, well, okay, would you like to consider some other options? And they said, well, yeah, if you got anything inside about an hour of the metro, we'd take a look at that. Important point here. I'm sure that as a community, depending upon where you're located, sometimes you may get pushback from companies saying, you're located where? And, oh, no, that's way too far away. You know, I see companies all the time hop on a plane on a bi-weekly, monthly basis to go visit a customer that's 6 hours away. Or they subcontract some of their manufacturing to China, and they go there once a month. Whatever it is. What I find, and I'll just be candid, I completely discount any resistance to geographic boundaries when I first start talking to a company, because once I found time and again where there's a good business fit and company and community are talking, that all of a sudden it is amazing how the company says, well, that's not so far away, that's not too bad. And so the point is, these guys ended up going down to northwest Iowa. They moved their whole company there, including their families, because they were so engaged by the community. Where at the onset they were saying, well, an hour away is probably about as far as we could go. They said, Justin, the folks in Iowa, in the community, I think smartly, as a community population of about 2,500, came in and said, guys, here's what we can do, and just as important, here's the things that we can't do. We're not a huge company. We're not going to roll the red carpet and throw a whole bunch of money at you. Here's what we can do, however. You talk about longer term wanting to build a gun range, and you know what? We think we can help you with that day one. We've got plenty of land in our industrial park, and if that fills up, we can always build another one. And so we'd like to dangle the carrot of basically helping you not only build your facility this spring, but also have you start on your test range facility right away. And the company was ecstatic because they said, we thought that was a 4 to 5 year plan. We'd have to have it off-site, assuming we were in somewhat of a urban location, etc. The other thing that the community did is said, we want you to feel welcome. We believe that you are wanting to move out of your current location because people don't welcome you. So we're going to, from a state level down to a local level, leverage the contacts that we have with the law enforcement officials and others just to show you that a business like yours will be well received not only in our community but in our state. And so it's simple, but it was very telling to the company. HSS Group is a company that makes sensors for the equine industry. When I met them, they were and still are based in Wayzata, which is a western suburb of Minneapolis. And I said, have you ever thought about doing a partnership with a rural area? And they said, no, why would we? We're going to stay here. And I said, well, let's consider some options. And they said, well, we'd be open to partnering with somebody, sales and marketing wise, if they know our industry. And boy, we're always wanting to work with people that understand large animal markets, specifically equine or horse. And so there's a community we work with that has a technical school with a 2-year specific certification in equine management. And oh, by the way, their campus on the edge of town has about a 40,000 square foot facility that they bring in 5,000 horses a year. And at that location, they built an incubation facility, so probably about, I don't know, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, where they said, we want to make it so companies can come here and do business, whether that's temporary or long-term, but they can be on site, on campus, working with faculty, staff, students, etc. And so the company said, well, this is ideal because we can sign a 3-year lease to some very nice space, have access to work hands-on with the college, and we can walk out the back door and be in a horse barn that they've allowed us to work with animals on and whatnot. And they said, that's great. And oh, by the way, there's a local company who the development director developed a relationship with that said, we're very open to partnership opportunities if it's the right scenario. They met with the company and said, we'll basically manage your sales and marketing operations for you. The company said, well, we're already going to be down in the community quite a bit anyway, so that works for us. And that opened the door then to some local investors and some other things. So it was really that community. I go back to the technical school saying, we want to create an environment that is receptive for companies to come and do business here, and we want to work with them. And that was really, I think, the starting point for that project. LifeFloor is a company that when I met them, they're based in Minneapolis, and their manufacturing partner is over in Vietnam, and they make a slip-resistant flooring tile. Think of like a foam flip-flop. And they said, Justin, we'd love to manufacture domestically, but it's impossible. And I said, well, why is that? And they said, well, all these manufacturing capabilities went overseas in the 80s, and nobody's brought it back. And I said, well, why don't you create it here? And they said, well, we aren't necessarily wanting to build our own manufacturing facility in Minneapolis. It'd be too expensive. And second, anybody we've approached domestically from a partnership basis or contract manufacturing basis has said, you know what, we don't have the requisite equipment, we're not trained on it, et cetera. So if you want to invest significantly, we'd be willing to work with you. And they said, it's just not going to work. Community we work with in a small community in South Dakota came back and said, after the company presented their program, and suggested we have a local company that likes to, again, develop new revenue streams and whatnot, and would like to talk to these guys. And the company said, here's what we'll commit, company in South Dakota. We'll commit to doing, investing time, and time alone, to do some R&D and determine what would it take to manufacture your project. The community said, if these guys locally here in South Dakota agree to partner with LifeFloor, that gives us a high level of confidence such that we would, through our local utility and a couple other groups, be happy to help with financing some equipment. And so LifeFloor, the company, said, well, this is great because now, unlike our bank who doesn't want to finance manufacturing equipment, we have an opportunity to be able to source the equipment that we need. And so it was a great example, I think, of the community leveraging the relationship with an existing manufacturer to get this company in. Now, near term, they've dedicated 2 positions to this. Longer term, they think it'll create 7 new jobs. The upside, however, significant upside, I think, is the company in South Dakota retained the right to basically take what they're learning and be able to apply it to other industries. And LifeFloor said, as long as you don't plan to make slip-resistant flooring tile that's competitive to us, have at it. That's not our business. And so it was a great way to create a new opportunity. I've got 2 more examples, but I'm going to skip those and just go directly to the takeaways so that I'm not going over my time here. Here's the thing. I've done this for 9 years. Doesn't make me the expert by any stretch, but I have worked with communities around the Midwest and, frankly, communities throughout the U.S., but mostly rural areas in the Midwest. I've worked with hundreds of companies. I've learned a few things along the way, and I'm always happy to be a resource if people have questions. I think the opportunities out there, what I see time and again, however, is that most of these companies aren't looking for me and they aren't looking for you, to be blunt. And so it's a matter of getting in front of them and correctly position yourself as a community as to what are the attributes and benefits of doing business there. Most people intuitively know about cost of doing business should be lower, and yep, I could see where I could get a loyal workforce. What they don't know about is some of the opportunities for partnership. They don't know about some of the unique ways communities are using traditional and non-traditional incentives. And so the beauty, I always say, is when you can engage a company in a good fit with your community, it's not going to be nearly as competitive as some of the traditional site selection stuff. And you're going to know day one who these companies are what their motivations are, and you really have a chance to influence the project. And ultimately, I don't think that any community is going to turn their back and quit returning phone calls if big companies are interested in coming in your community. There needs to be a multifaceted approach to recruitment and economic development, in my opinion. But I think this is a great way to go after these small and mid-sized businesses to kind of complement an overall plan, be talking to a lot of companies, chance to diversify the industry locally, et cetera. So I'm happy to share the presentation. I welcome feedback. If people have questions, feedback, if I said anything anybody disagrees with strongly, I welcome that too. So with that, I'll wrap up, and I really appreciate everybody's time this morning.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Justin, for that very informative presentation. One question did come in about whether or not you'd be available to share the slides, and you just supported that. So I sent that answer back to everybody, and you can send an email to Victor, and his email is vperez, P-E-R-E-Z, at goldenshovel.com, and he'll send you the slides for the today's presentation. Second question had come in for you, Justin, says, how can I obtain a copy of the white paper on the pros and cons of each option, the formal investment fund, formal angel investor network, and the ad hoc group?
Yep, yeah, if folks have that, you can see, I think, still see my screen here. Just justin@essexllc.net is my email address. Or I've listed my cell phone here if folks have questions. I think I'm fairly approachable. So you're welcome. Just shoot me an email, shoot me a phone call, and I'm happy to send it over.
Okay, sounds wonderful. If there's anybody has additional questions, please feel free to type them in now over on the right-hand column in the GoToWebinar presentation. Okay, I have another question here for you, Justin. And it's as far as have you had companies that have had complications dealing with the transparencies of site selection, or you touched on it a little bit during the presentation, but just where the opportunities that were being missed were too overwhelming?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, you maybe cut out a little bit there, Aaron. What's the specific question?
Just getting pushback from site selectors based on the anonymity of the businesses and the information that they're requesting.
Yeah, so I guess if the question is kind of my thoughts on that, I'll be very candid. I think that a lot of site selectors go on a fishing expedition in order to get the client engagement. And what I mean by that is I think they overpromise things to companies such that they say, oh, there's going to be all sorts of interest and we can work miracles as it relates to incentive packages. And by the time they reach out to communities, they don't have the company under engagement. And so they are collecting proposals so they can go back to that company. And so I think that's why some of them are hesitant to disclose much information. I know that can come across as a very jaded view, but I want to be very realistic with it. The other thing that I find is that site selectors, and again, I'm not trying to vilify site selectors. I've done some of this work, but I know for some that I've talked to, they feel that as long as they have control ultimately of the information, which the most important piece presumably is who the heck is the company, that they maintain the upper hand and the leverage in the negotiation. And I know that I have worked with some companies that have worked with site selectors in the past, and the feedback I've gotten is that the company said, well, we need this to remain confidential. And I said, well, why on earth would that be a problem? And so I think companies sometimes are skittish, and so they have the site selectors in turn make sure that everything remains very anonymous and confidential. The only realistic, in my opinion, piece of feedback I get is that, hey, if we do this, this could have impact on maybe a plant closure, maybe this has impact on some of our staff and management, et cetera, and so that companies want to make sure that everything stays very, very secure, if you will. And I understand that. At the same time, I have never run into, and this is in fact, I sent an RFP out recently to some communities that we work with, and the company said, well, we don't want to disclose anything about us. And I said, then I'm not willing to help you. And they said, well, we need to be sensitive and this, that, and the other. And I said, right, I have never in 9 years had one instance where a community has taken information and when asked to treat it confidentially and share it with anybody where they shouldn't have. And so I'll be candid, if I talk to a site selector, because once in a while I get approached by them, I just push back very heavily and say I can reach out to my communities, I can help, etc. But back to that example, the folks in Wisconsin, I'm finding some communities that are saying no. Now, you could argue it's a little bit of a game of chicken. If every community said no, we won't respond, absent knowing who this company is, at least what industry they're in, the opportunity, that the site selectors would have to change their ways. But I don't think all communities would do that. So I'm not sure, Aaron, if I'm giving a good answer to that. And if somebody has a particular question and wants to call me, I'd be happy to talk further. But I'm yet to see why, and I would be extremely demotivated if I were a development director to pursue those opportunities, because I don't even know if it's a good fit.
Great, thank you. Another question has come in. How does Essex and or CVN engage with communities? Is it a fee or membership base, and what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, so our program is an annual membership fee, and that varies whether it's a standalone, EDA, EDC, however a group is structured, whether at a community or county level, all the way up to, obviously we get a lot of regional groups. We get some groups who, from at least a marketing standpoint, it might be a couple communities locally that partner together, or counties, or work in conjunction with the economic development arm of their utility. We just look at it on a case-by-case basis, but this is a process, and so I ask if a community does participate that they do so and make the commitment for a year. In return, they're going to see 25 to 30 companies. Not all of them are going to be a fit, and they're probably not going to be interested in all of them, but hopefully they're seeing some good deal flow out of that. I don't want to naively say people are beating down my door to be part of the program. Conversely, I'm guessing the majority of folks on the phone may not have heard of us. And if you were to go out and say, look at some of the press from this Capital Arms project or Life Floor and whatnot, I don't think you'll find anything with any mention of CVN. And I do that, one, because I'm not seeking publicity. And two, I know some of our communities say, well, last thing we want to do is do a project and then have a whole bunch of our communities around us start calling you and be part of the program. That kind of dilutes the message. So we do limit our participation of communities to 30 groups. And a group can be a regional group that might have 4 or 5 participants, but we do limit to 30 groups at any given time. So we feel that we spread it amongst the different states and keep it competitive for and fair for our communities.
Great. Thank you. Another question just came in. Are you aware of any pushback from community banks if and when the economic development organizations provide working capital financing?
Yeah, there is, and I'm not well versed in the legal ramifications, but I have run into situations where loan funds have been skittish to be anything but a gap financier or do anything that isn't led by a primary lender, such that they may be perceived, real or otherwise, as being competitive to the local bank and offering better terms, conditions, et cetera, and that isn't fair to the local bank. That's happened a few times. In reality, on the other end of the spectrum, I have had local bankers that oftentimes it's a sticky relationship in a good way, but a lot of times the local bank presidents happen to sit on the EDA board, and so they may recluse themselves for conflict of interest purposes, real or otherwise, from looking at a potential project. I have seen other communities that have come back and said, you know what, we want to do this project, but our local banks aren't interested, so we need a primary lender, but it's got to come outside of our community. And so it does happen from time to time, but usually what will happen is if a community wants to use a revolving loan fund, whether it's 25 grand or 250 grand as, say, a direct lending tool to a company, and the concern is that, well, how would this rub the local banks? Are they going to view it as we're basically taking business away from them, et cetera? Not that you're going to throw good money at bad, per se, and lend money to a company who isn't reputable and who you think has no chance in paying you back, but a lot of times some of those deals might not meet the criteria of the local bank. And so the local bank may say, have at it, because it's not a deal that we would do anyways. And so I just try to always manage it on a case-by-case basis and kind of get a lay of the land of who the local banks are. Have they met with the company? Should we just have a private conversation with them and see if this is of interest to them, or are they concerned about the loan fund? So I've never had it be, I've had it be an issue in terms of we have to discuss it. I've never had it be a reason why we didn't do a project or use a loan fund.
Okay, excellent. I have another question that's come in. It says, does your company have a ranking or percentage of matches you have made? I love your process and actually attended a session years ago, but just wondering how you value your success.
Good question. And I do it 2 ways. And as I mentioned, I've run the program since 2006. I bought it from the founders, and so I don't know if this particular person attended before or after that, but I've run it largely the same. I'd like to think, having done it for 9 years, I've learned a few things and made some improvements, but I have a few different metrics for success. The first is a very simple one. Can I get 8 to 10 good companies in a room and get my communities vested in terms of wanting to come to Minneapolis and meet with these companies and engage in dialogue with them? That's a simple one, but frankly, that's probably a core tenet of what I do, and so that's the starting point. The second metric is, am I getting communities? I don't want every community that comes to one of our programs to be interested in all the businesses. I want to have them find 2 or 3 that they say those are the ones we want to engage with. And so, are we getting communities interested in each of the companies that come to the programs? That's kind of the second level. The third level then is, are we getting companies then engaged to the point that they're saying, yep, we've talked to some of these communities, we're interested, and now we're motivated, we're going to go do some site visits and start meeting with these companies. That is kind of those 3 things in total are my first level of success. Are we getting that from pretty much all the companies that are coming through our program in terms of all the way to the point of making site visits? Now we know, obviously, intuitively, site visits in and of themselves do not create jobs, and so the end goal is not to just get a bunch of people in a room in your community and say, hey, what a win, that was terrific. The end goal is to actually get something done. And so I would say that I'll have at least 8 companies present at my program, so basically 24 a year between April, August, and December. My goal is to get half of those partnered up with a community. I don't have a lot of control over that, meaning I stay as involved as a community and a company wants me to after a project or after a program. Sometimes that's not at all, and so I can't force these projects through. I'll help where I can, but my goal is to see half of the companies that come through in a given year ultimately go do something. That can be as formal as the Cap Arms folks who should be breaking ground on their facility in the next 30 days, and that can be as informal as a company that keeps a small office and does a joint venture or works with a technical school or a local 4-year university. As long as there's something that the community is coming back to me and saying, this is material from our standpoint, if not from direct job creation, it's a material partnership, then I consider that a win. I'll be realistic, not every project is successful long term. Not all of them are huge in terms of job creators, but we do get quite a few done.
Okay. Another question came in, and I think you might have touched on it earlier, but if you could touch on it again. How many communities are members of CVN, either standalone or part of regional groups?
Yeah, so we'll have 30 groups that will participate. I think right now I've got 28 members or something like that. And if you come to one of our programs, you'll see about 75 folks in the room. How do those numbers reconcile? Is we may have regional groups that will send, and maybe it's a 4-county region that has 3 communities that are active participants in that county, and they may send 3 representatives to a meeting. Or we may have a community, I'm thinking of a group in Wisconsin that inevitably always sends 2 or 3 people over, and so usually there's more people represented than individual communities. Now, why I can confidently, I think, say back to a community that says, well, we might want to join, but boy, there's a big difference between are we, call it what it is, competing with 29 other folks, or are we competing with 74 other folks? What I ask of our regional members is that they obviously are going to speak for and be identified by their own community and county, but that it looks Bush League, if I can say that, if a region is competing head-to-head amongst other counties and communities within the region. So the point is, if a region sends 3 or 4 people up to our program, what I ask them to do is go back, review the information, and hopefully propose what they think is the lead community or best option for the company within the region. I don't police it too heavily. I always say that the communities own the leads themselves and can see and basically work with the company however they see fit, but we do ask them to play somewhat nice on a local basis. So to answer the question, we'll work with up to 30 groups at any given time across those 8 states.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes the questions for today, and also brings us to the end of the hour. So thank you so much for coming and presenting at our expert webinar series, and thanks for the informative presentation. Once again, please feel free to contact Victor for copies of the slides. And that email address was vperez, V-P-E-R-E-Z, @goldenshovel.com. And other than that, please keep an eye out for our next webinar in April, and we'll be sending out information regarding that soon. And look forward to seeing you guys all there. So thank you so much, and thank you, Justin.
I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for taking the time to join this morning. I welcome feedback, questions. Again, my intent was hopefully to generate some interest, maybe some questions I could help with, not to talk about at length about what I do or solicit for my services, but I'm here as a resource if ever I can be, and happy to help if folks have questions.
Thank you so much. And have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, everyone.